In my video counting down the 15 worst adapted DCEU superheroes, we saw how little regard the people making those movies had for some of the most popular and beloved heroes in the DC Comics. And due to that, we saw a bit of why this universe fizzled out and died as relatively quickly as it did. And though the 3Cs system used to rate and rank every hero adapted into the DCEU so we could see those bottom 15 is utterly infallible, the most objectively bad adaptations are not always the most viscerally hated adaptations. And like before, in the comments for that video, I got a lot of people asking why certain incredibly hated DCEU heroes were not considered poorly adapted enough to make it into those bottom 15. So here's a companion video to that one, counting down the top 5 most requested bad hero adaptations in the DCEU, ordered by how many comments I got asking for them. I'll go over the reasons they're similar enough to have stayed out of the bottom 15, as well as what it was about them that made them so incredibly hated as adaptations anyways. I'll be excluding characters like Aquaman and Superman, who I did get a crapload of comments saying should have been on the bottom of the list, but actually did make it into the top 15 best adapted list instead. That didn't mean that they were good adaptations. It only means that of all the heroes in the DCEU, they were among the 15 best of them, which really isn't an impressive feat, honestly. And I already went over all the ways they were different as well. So if you want to see me talk about the ways those guys are similar and different, you've got a list you can go check out to do that. For all the rest of you real OGs who already watched that one, we'll move forward. So starting our list with the most obvious one, and the most divisive hero adapted into the DCEU, we've got Batman. While this version of Batman has his fans, for some reason, a lot of people would have loved to see this version of Batman tossed down under the worst adapted in the entire universe. But we have to be honest here. There are a lot of elements of the character that the movies did get correct compared to how different a lot of other characters in the DCEU were. Both versions were young when their parents were killed by a mugger on their way home from the theater, leaving Bruce with a lifelong hatred of all crime. However, in the movie version, I don't feel as bad for his parents, since Thomas Wayne reacts to a gun being pointed at his family by punching the mugger in the frickin' face, basically guaranteeing the gun was going to go off and kill all of them. Both versions spent years training themselves to physical and mental perfection, though in the comics he explicitly traveled the world to learn his skills, while in the movie we don't learn much about how he gained them. But regardless, both then returned to Gotham to use their inheritance to wage a war on criminality as the Batman. Batman's had a million different costume variations in the comics, and this version is a pretty good amalgamation of a few of them, taking specific inspirations from the bulkier Dark Knight Returns style of costume and logo, but still keeping that weird-ass beady eye look that most cinematic Batman seem to still have to this day. Both versions have a Batmobile, a Batwing, a Batcave, a Bat-Signal, and is allies with both Commissioner Gordon and Alfred, even though the DCEU Alfred is much closer to Bruce's age than in the comics, which is frickin' weird. What was he, a boy butler back in the day for the Waynes? What's the story here? He's also got a cadre of villains, including the Joker, Harley Quinn, Killer Croc, Deadshot, and so on, though we never really get to see him frickin' fight any of them. Both versions took on a sidekick known as Robin, with a version of him being eventually murdered by the Joker. And both comic and movie Batman go on to serve on the Justice League while continuing their roles as the Defender of Gotham. One of the biggest differences, though, is that in the comics, Batman is portrayed at around the same age as Superman and the other major heroes in the DCU, while in the movies he's portrayed as being quite a bit older. Already a grizzled and graying veteran when a young Superman shows himself to the world. While Superman has not even faced Lex Luthor, Batman's already faced off against most of his most famous villains, and both taken on and lost a sidekick. So sure, some major differences, but for the most part, so far, he's fairly close to the comics in a lot of ways, as far as DCEU adaptations go. But those differences really aren't why people dislike this adaptation of the character so goddamn much. That reason would be that while the Batman in the comics has an incredibly strict, self-imposed no-killing rule, the movie version is a psychotic, unrepentant borderline serial killer. He runs people over in the Batmobile, guns them down with a mounted turret, smashes a dude against a wall so hard his brains splatter out, shoot a guy's flamethrower to literally blow him up, and kills like 20 people in that messed up dystopian future world by snapping their neck and shooting them with a frickin' machine gun. And the entire plot of Batman v Superman is that Batman is literally plotting to outright fucking murder Superman. Not for anything he's specifically done, but just the potential threat he could be. This guy is a frickin' psychopath, man. In the comics, most heroes avoid killing, but Batman's strict no-kill code is a huge part of the character, and really sets him apart from other dark vigilante characters as a strong and incredibly disciplined moral paragon. Now, whenever you bring this up, there'll always be some asshole who comes in and say, actually, Batman did kill people in the comics back in the day. I read an article about it online. But that's a bullshit excuse, in my opinion. Most of the early Golden Age deaths Batman caused weren't really intentional. And the ones that were, I mean, come on. Does shooting a vampire werewolf guy or hanging some frickin' monster men even count as killing? And once that no-kill rule was set, it's been taken seriously for decades of continuity, and has led to some really interesting stories and moral difficulties for the character. Whether it's because he doesn't want to cross a line that'll make him as bad as the criminals he faces, or just simply because he thinks murder is, wrong. This is a huge aspect of Batman's character that the movies just completely disregard, and it pissed off a lot of people. This more brutal version of Batman is inspired again from the Batman seen in The Dark Knight Returns, who is older and more brutal in his methods of combating crime. But this version still doesn't kill. A huge plot point in that comic is that even when he sets out to finally kill the Joker and tries to stab his neck, he just cannot bring himself to do it. He twists it to the point of paralyzing Joker, but his strict code against killing prevents him from finishing the job, causing Joker to hauntingly laugh maniacally as he finishes snapping his own neck for him. And even the future dystopian nightmare world where Superman is taken over and Batman has dropped all pretenses of non-lethal means and guns down soldiers left and right is inspired from the Injustice game series, where the main reason Batman opposes this totalitarian version of Superman is because Superman is killing people while Batman refuses to do so and sees it as evil. Alright, and sure, say you personally don't give a shit and you think violent murder Batman is badass as hell. That's all fine and good. We can disagree, no problem. But if this version of Batman kills, then this version of Batman is both a hypocrite and a frickin' moron. Cause why the hell is the Joker still alive after it's established he brutally murdered Robin? Why is Harley Quinn still alive if it's stated she was an accomplice to that murder? Batman will kill every random friggin' henchman he comes across, but only breaks the Joker's teeth in when he murders his surrogate son and then saves Harley's life? It doesn't make any goddamn sense at all. And lastly, there's one other major difference. In the comics, Batman is the world's greatest detective, but in the movies, he's clearly not. If he were, he would have very likely been able to uncover Lex Luthor's pretty obvious manipulations to trick him into outright murdering Superman. I mean, Lois Lane was able to uncover Superman's identity in like a week, but Batman wasn't, and is shocked to learn that the guy he's trying to kill is a regular person just like him, and not just some dangerous god entity when he says that infamous Mortho line. Bull honky. This guy is not smart. So with all that superficial stuff, yeah, a lot is correct and must be acknowledged. But if I wanted a badass psychotic murder Batman out of DC, I've already got fucking Midnighter. So let's move on. Next up we have an almost equally hated hero adaptation with The Flash. So if there's a character I personally disliked in the DCEU, it was Barry Allen. And according to those comments, and the movie's box office, a lot of people agree with me. But like Batman, we gotta be honest about what is well adapted to see what isn't. Both versions got their powers when a freak lightning strike hit him through an open window, causing him to simultaneously be doused by a collapsing shelf of nearby chemicals. This accident connected him to what became known as the Speed Force, allowing him to move at superhuman speeds, turning him into the fastest man alive. In the comics, he was working as a police scientist for the Central City Police Department, while in the movies he's a bit younger and had yet to officially join the CCPD, and was working in the Central City Research Center as a student studying to become a forensic scientist when the accident occurred. Both versions also suffered tragedy when they were young, when their mother was mysteriously murdered and their father was framed as the killer, leading to his lifelong imprisonment. In the comics, his mother was revealed to have been murdered by his time-traveling arch-nemesis, Reverse Flash. In the DCU, the director of the movie has claimed it was Reverse Flash who killed her, but that doesn't really make any frickin' sense. In the movie, his mom was killed when an intruder enters the house thinking no one is home because she sent her husband out to get an extra can of tomatoes. When Barry goes back in time to save his mother, all he does is give her that extra can, ensuring that her husband is home when their intruder breaks in. If it was Reverse Flash who killed her, how in God's name would his dad being home have stopped that? Nothing would have changed. So I call post-release trying to fish for a sequel bullshit, and believe that in the movies this was just some random home invasion gone wrong. Anyways, after using his powers to become a hero, Barry's initial costume has a bizarre armored look that kinda looks like his comic costume, but super ugly, while the version he wears in his solo movie does look a lot closer. Though it does share a lot of the common mistakes live-action superhero costume have that make him look kinda worse and weird. Random-ass lines thrown all around, the removal of specific color choices that gives it that weird naked look, and being way too thick and rubbery, both making it look like some kind of weird fetish costume, and also making it look cheap as hell even though it probably cost $1 million. Someday the movies will have the balls to just toss some thin spandex on everybody, but until then, we'll keep going with this, I guess. Both versions go on to become invaluable members of the Justice League and meet and fall in love with Central City journalist Iris West. So like Batman, a lot of elements are similar enough, but there are two major differences that lead to people disliking this version of the character as much as they do. The first is that in the comics, Flash is known for having a very large and colorful cast of villains, so many that they often team up to oppose the Scarlet Speedster as the Rogues. While in the DCEU, he's faced exactly one Flash villain, Captain Boomerang, for 2 seconds when he robbed a bank in a flashback. No Captain Cold, no Heatwave, no Weather Wizard, none of that. Not even a quick cameo at the beginning of the movie like I expected them to do, and as said before, not even somebody like Reverse Flash. This is one of the most iconic parts of the character and the city he lives in, completely and utterly unrepresented in the movies. And I know someone will inevitably say, well, he fought Black Flash, right? Well, that's a Flash villain. Yeah, no. Because one, that thing was not referred to as Black Flash. Promotional material called it Dark Flash, which is a totally different and completely unrelated character. And second, it was nothing like either of those characters anyways. It was just some random shit they made up for the movie, so it doesn't matter. And the other major reason people don't like this version of the Flash is even simpler. He's frickin' annoying. In the comics, Barry Allen is a pretty quiet, nerdy guy who's very interested in science and often gets lost in his work. He'd often use his methodical and analytical nature to come up with ways to creatively use his powers based on the basics of physics and other scientific principles, and would describe how they worked with simple educational flash facts for the readers. In the movies, Barry is virtually the exact opposite character. He's still clearly very intelligent, but instead of being calm and shy, he's manic and extroverted, pretty much always talking and talking and talking and talking whenever he's on screen, changing the subject all the time, interrupting himself, and getting distracted with a very, very clear form of ADHD or something. And as for his powers, he's not that creative or clever with them, usually resorted to just the basics of running fast and having to be inspired and guided by other more experienced heroes like Batman. Instead of giving us Barry Allen, they just gave him a generic, quick-talking, distractible speedster personality instead, making him sound more like Blur from Transformers and acting a lot more like the Impulse version of Bart Allen from the comics. Now, despite all of this and my own personal issues with the character, there is one other similarity between the comics and the DCEU that somewhat redeems him for me personally, but that's only because I am a continuity nerd. In the comics, Barry got the idea to name himself The Flash after the original Golden Age Flash, Jay Garrick. Originally, their stories were based on two separate Earths, and Barry took the name from a comic he'd read. But after their Earths were merged in the Crisis on Infinite Earths, it was changed to him being inspired by the Golden Age hero who had existed in his own past and retired. Well, in the DCEU, they took advantage of him never being called the Flash in Justice League to have him become inspired to use the name when meeting the CW version of the Flash during their version of Crisis on Infinite Earths. The CW version of Barry says he's the Flash on his own world, assuming that this version is also called the Flash, but the DCEU version has not heard the name and thinks it sounds cool. And the next time we see him, that's what he's being referred to as. This kind of convoluted multiversal continuity is something we rarely get to see outside of comics, so I am all for it. However, they undid my happiness by not having the CW version cameo for even a friggin' second in the Flash movie, so screw it. I'm glad that movie bombed. Next up, we have a character who fully deserves placement at the bottom of a worst adapted list. Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. Jimmy Olsen is one of the oldest and most well-known characters in all of comics, up there with Lois Lane and Lex Luthor as being as iconic and well-known as the Man of Steel himself. As such an old character, Jimmy has gone through a few different origins, but the basics of his characterization are pretty much always the same. He's a young, earnest, and hard-working photographer working at the Daily Planet. He's often known for his old-fashioned sense of style, including his iconic bow ties and his dorky but incredibly confident personality. He works alongside reporters Lois Lane and Clark Kent, and after Superman reveals himself to the world, the two become pals. With Superman giving Jimmy a special signal watch Jimmy can activate to instantly call Superman to his side in times of need. A beloved and wholesome part of Superman's lore, who was popular enough to star in his own series for decades, where he is known for having all kinds of bizarre and zany adventures. He's always remained an integral part of Superman's lore in all its forms. In the DCEU, this beloved and iconic character is this random dude who got shot at the beginning of Batman v Superman, and that's it. He's a photojournalist accompanying Lois Lane at the beginning of the movie to investigate a foreign militia group. Jimmy is quickly exposed as actually being an undercover CIA operative using Lois's journalistic credentials to go undercover. He's then promptly shot in the head and killed. So, yep, that's the DCEU Jimmy Olsen. He's not a reporter, he looks nothing similar, and he's killed right away. If there's a bigger fuck you to comic fans in a movie, I don't know what the hell it would be. There was no reason to do any of this except to piss people off. Just name this guy anything else. Or better yet, just cut him out of the movie, which, I mean, they basically did in the theatrical cut of the film. Oh, and by the way, this guy's codename was Talon, so he's also super badass. And you know, This version of Superman really could have used a pal too to ground him. Instead of being an open-hearted friend of the world, DCEU Superman is pretty isolated and detached from humanity. His parents didn't teach him the morals he'd need to become Superman. His best friend Batman was a psycho who tried to murder him for virtually no reason. He's got no pal Jimmy Olsen to keep him grounded. No wonder this guy turned out like he did. Next up we have Black Adam. Now, calling Black Adam a hero may be a bit of a stretch, but he's been portrayed as an anti-hero in comics from time to time, and the movie sure seems to think he's a hero, so we'll go with it. I'm going to start out with the obvious. They ditched the pointy ears and the widow's peak. I assume The Rock didn't want to wear a wig and admit he's not bald by choice, and also didn't want to look like an elf. But this is what the character frickin' looks like. Without those elements, it doesn't matter how good the costume is, he'll just look like a half-assed cosplayer in the end. Anyways, as for the costume, the capeless version he wears for most of the movie is cut very similar to his classic outfit, including the wide neck hole and the placement of the lightning bolt. The cape version he wears at the end is different from the style he wears in modern comics. Instead of having the dark version of Captain Marvel look, this style just makes him look like an evil Superman, which makes sense considering that's what they were trying to set up with that post-credit scene. And one of the strangest changes to me is that the DCEU version of Black Adam doesn't wear black. His costume is sort of a dark gray color for most of the movie. As for his origin, in the comics, the Wizard Shazam either chooses him or his nephew as his next champion, depending on what era you're reading it. In one version, 10th Adam is a noble champion until his family and homeland are slaughtered, and he becomes a violent tyrant to get revenge. In the other, his nephew grants some of his newfound power to his mortally wounded uncle, but Adam kills his nephew later on to take all the power for himself, so he can free their people and slaughter those who enslaved them, becoming a tyrant. In the movies, they kind of toss both of these origins together in the boringest way possible. Instead, it was his son who is chosen as the champion, but when his father is mortally wounded, he transfers his power into him, and when a newly empowered Adam watches his now powerless son murdered in front of him, he slaughters all those responsible and becomes a tyrant. All versions are confronted by the Wizard for their fall to darkness and imprisoned or banished for centuries as the Wizard searches for a new champion to serve instead. Now, if the movies were to follow the comics, Black Adam would have been freed into the world in Shazam and fought Billy Batson as a villain before returning to free Kahndaq, which would have been awesome. Black Adam may have been fleshed out over the years, but he was created to be a Captain Marvel villain, and those are the roots he'll always be tied to. Instead, they decided to completely ignore his connections to Captain Marvel and just gave him a solo movie and assume, for God knows what reason, that people would be interested in what non-comic readers would see as a random-ass character with a weird-ass name. The way they used him here would be like doing a Reverse Flash solo movie completely unconnected to an already released Flash one. Absolute nonsense. Anyway, in the movie version, he is reawakened in Kahndaq and begins killing its current oppressors, Intergang, to help free the country. Soon after, the Justice Society is sent in to put an end to Black Adam's violent killing spree. In the comics, after years of being just a straight villain to Captain Marvel, Black Adam reveals that many of his most evil acts were due to the insanity brought on by the corruptive influence of the body of his descendant he was inhabiting, as well as an undiagnosed brain tumor. After freeing himself of the influence of both, Black Adam tried to show he was redeemed of the world by joining the Justice Society of America. After disagreeing many times with the Justice Society's unwillingness to kill supervillains and criminals, and seeing the evils being inflicted on his homeland of Kahndaq in the modern day by a corrupt and oppressive government, Adam decides to pursue his own brutal form of justice by killing villains and slaughtering all those who'd taken over Kahndaq. That is why the Justice Society goes overseas to oppose him in the comics, because they see him as one of their own, and that it's their responsibility to stop his violent crusade. In the movies, the Justice Society just goes overseas to stop Black Adam because Amanda Waller tells him to. Seeing Waller command the Justice Society is downright bizarre, as they're an independent organization stretching back to well before she was even born. In the movie, Atom Smasher is one of the members who goes to stop him, while in the comics, Atom Smasher had been moved to follow Black Adam's more ruthless ideology and left the team to go liberate Kahndaq with him. In both versions, Black Adam's ruthless liberation of Kahndaq has its citizens seeing him as a savior, and though the heroes of the world disagree with his methods, they are reluctantly forced to abide by the wishes of Kahndaq's citizens to herald him as their champion. In the comics, things eventually go really bad for Adam, leading to violence on a horrific scale. While in the movies, the film bombing so bad was one of the things that led to the whole universe being scrapped, and we'll never know how his fight against Superman would have gone. Black Adam is one of my favorite comic characters, so this was a pretty big bummer for me personally. And now, lastly, we have a character who bridges both DCEU into the upcoming DCU, Peacemaker. So a lot of people complain that Peacemaker is a terrible adaptation who is nothing like the comics. And they're right, he is an awful adaptation of the original Charlatan Comics version of the character, but of the completely rewritten version introduced into the DC universe after they bought out the Charlatan versions, he's actually not that bad. In the original Charlton comics, Peacemaker was a diplomat representing the United States who loved peace so much that he was willing to fight for it, creating the identity of Peacemaker and using a variety of non-lethal weapons to stop various dictators and international criminals who endangered the peace of the world when diplomacy wasn't enough. When DC bought up the Charlton action heroes, they integrated them into their universe. Some were adapted in pretty well, like Blue Beetle, but with Peacemaker, they didn't do that. The new DC version of Peacemaker was a murderous, unstable psychopath who claims he's willing to kill to keep the peace, but is actually just a murderous, unstable psychopath who clearly likes killing people. Both the DCEU and DC Comics versions of Peacemaker are the sons of unrepentant racists. In the comics, his father was an SS officer for Germany in World War II who commanded over a concentration camp. In the movies, they made him the White Dragon, a more contemporary DC villain who follows the same racial supremacist ideologies. Both versions suffered abuse and trauma from their fathers that follows them into the modern day and drives a lot of their violent ideologies. While the comic version's father died when he was young, the DCEU version killed his own father in the modern day. But both versions suffer from hallucinations of their father after his death. The comic version of Peacemaker started as a soldier who fought in Vietnam, but snapped and murdered a village full of people. He was then court-martialed and sentenced to life in prison before being released by the government in order to serve in an elite secret force known as Project Peacemaker. In the DCEU, he'd been inspired by the senseless death of his brother to channel his violence into always killing for a reason and became a costume vigilante, taking out dangerous villains like Kite Man before being arrested for his crimes and sentenced to 30 years in prison. He was then released by the government to serve on a mission with Task Force X. Both versions are experts with firearms and are master combatants. They both wear technologically advanced bulletproof helmets that can do things like release a sonic burst and other abilities. And their costumes are pretty similar, sharing the bold colors in a way most costume adaptations aren't willing to do, including those white pants and big blue gloves. And unlike most comic adaptations, DCEU Peacemaker actually has about as close to the super muscular build of a comic character as can be achieved by a regular human. To be fair, Black Adam had that too, but I was so annoyed and distracted by the hair that I completely forgot to point that out. So, though a lot of the details of their continuities are very different from each other, both are men who suffer from psychological issues who will kill as many people as they feel they must to ensure their definitions of peace. And though I think the original Charlton super spy version is more interesting than the psycho-murderous extremist version DC turned him into, this is the DC extended universe, not the Charlton extended universe. As awesome as that'd be. I mean, they're all technically public domain, somebody get on that. And though Peacemaker ain't the best adaptation, as far as the DC version goes, he really ain't even close to the worst. And with that, we can finally drop the E from the DCEU and go forward into what they're calling the DCU, where I'm very interested to see what's going to be well adapted and what's going to be poorly based on how many characters have guns appear on my worst adapted lists. You think this new universe is going to be able to give us some closer adaptations of characters like Superman, Batman, and The Flash, or you think they're going to be more off base and different? Disagree and think these characters were done awesomely? I appreciate you watching all the way through, even though I badmouthed them so much. I don't actually think they're technically bad characters, even if they're not my cup of tea. I just think that if you're trying to sell a universe that's based on something established, you should do what the established thing is, since that's the whole reason you're building this in the first place. I'm already working on a video for the universe I'm ranking next, but if you've got ones you want to see later, let me know and I'll add them to the list and get to them someday in the future when I find an open time. Do that whole like and subscribe and all that shit, and if you're interested in seeing how close or different other DCEU or other adaptations are, you can click this playlist here, I think. Until next time, as Jimmy Olsen always says,